Over the years, thousands of airmen trained at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. Many airmen had to endure the degradation of being African American in a racially biased southern city, especially in the 50s and 60s. Several of these airmen now live at the Veterans Home of California in Yountville. This is their story. We now join Henry Augustus, Gerald Guess, and Buford Johnson, who are in conversation about their Biloxi experience.
When I got to Baton Rouge, we stopped at a cafe, a restaurant, to have lunch. Compliments of the good old Air Force. I asked our escort, the sergeant, if I could go to make a phone call. And he says, oh yeah, they have phones right outside, and you got 10 minutes before we'll have to reboard the bus. So because my dad was from Baton Rouge, and my uncle and my grandmother and my grandfather and my aunt lived in Biloxi, not in Biloxi, rather in New Orleans, I decided to call them, let them know that I was headed in that direction.
I heard that was about an 8-hour trip.
It wasn't bad because, you could recline the seats, and we probably have had worse trips around the base as opposed to being on a pretty nice bus as we went along.
Were you traveling in uniform?
Yes, we were. Dress blues.
So when you got to Biloxi, how did you feel when you got there?
Well, the first thing on the way on the trip on the bus, they made one stop to let us go to a latrine, but we stopped in the middle of pretty much nowhere. I don't even remember the name of the little town that we were at, but I do remember there was a bar, and several of the guys got off to go to the latrine and to the bar. So it was myself and one other black airman that was on the bus, and he was gonna get off, and I told him, I said, well, I don't know if that's a good thing to do, but if you want to.
Why did you tell him that?
Well, my experience of being in any parts of the South, especially along the Gulf Coast, because as a kid we would travel to New Orleans and Baton Rouge to visit our family, and we were very much told that you can't just walk into the stores. Being from San Francisco like we do, we'd go in there.
Even if you had to go to the bathroom?
If you had to go to the bathroom, I don't ever remember using a bathroom. My dad would always carry these big 5-gallon jugs. We took care of our urine in,
Oh, yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah, it was. And my dad being from the South, he was afraid of the fact that we didn't understand the rules that was, pretty much the way the South was.
What year are you talking about?
I'm talking about when I was a kid, we would go there in the 50s and the 60s, and then when I got in the Air Force, it was around the summer of '67.
When you talk about the 50s and 60s.
During that period of time, you had a lot of turmoil in the South where blacks were being beaten up. You would hear about people being hung or shot.
Was that for segregation or for what?
That was during segregation.
During segregation.
Because, in '57, you had a lot of things would come on the TV where you'd see it in the newspaper, where you wasn't affected by it as much out in California, but every time we went to the South, my father would give us this little dissertation on how we were to act when we were there. You couldn't just go into a store and decide, well, I want a Hershey's candy bar. They would kind of question you about do you have money, you know, and we never did anything that we didn't have the money.
Well, let me explain. When I went to Biloxi, I didn't go by trailways. You said you went by train. So then I was with the United States Air Force. Ta-da!
With Tops in Blue.
Yes, with Tops in Blue.
So being with Tops in Blue, that must have been exciting.
Yeah, it was. It was really fun, you know, because as a young kid joining the Air Force, going to Biloxi, Biloxi was just a stop on the map. I traveled with Tops in Blue for about 3 years. And that meant we were a troop of people who met at least once a year, put a show together, and traveled. By the time my first 4 years were over in the Air Force, I had gone to every state in the Union, you know, and so I had seen every state except Hawaii. I saw Hawaii later on, and coming back from the Pueblo crisis in '68.
Well, was Biloxi a lot different from any other place that you traveled to?
It was in 1958 when I was in Biloxi. And we were a traveling group, a troupe of people, you know, performers. We flew into Biloxi, and then they took us to a room, and then they told all the white people to leave. And so they had this senior airman, black, and they told all the black children to leave, all the white children to leave the room.
Were
And-
you on the base at that time? Or?
On the base.
On the base.
But then he proceeded actually to tell us what the rules for living on that base and in the South were. It was something like, I know you all come from different bases, and wherever you were, blah, 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 he let it be known. But right here, you in Mississippi. And he just generally let us know the white man rules. We're on a base, and so you don't look at this person's rank, you know, especially if you get off base. You will not getting off a base sassing any white man. Well, I did confront him. And, you know, I got labeled what they did in those days. I got labeled as a troublemaker. And a troublemaker was a person that would stand up for his rights, or as he perceived them to be, you know.
What I'm interested to find out is, what was your worst experience that you had in Biloxi?
My worst experience was towards the end of my training there. We were in our last week of training pretty much, and we decided to go and off the base to celebrate. You know, we were going to be leaving within a week or 10 days to go to our permanent assignments. And myself and several other airmen who happened to be white, we went to this restaurant in Biloxi.
This is off base?
This is off base,
Okay.
yeah, downtown. And, you know, we're all from different parts of the country, and none of us gave any thought about segregation or just, you know, the normal that was happening there. And we happened to be in our uniforms, so we really didn't think that there was going to be any issues. So we went in this restaurant.
Did you see any signs visible that telling you who was allowed to be served or who wasn't?
No, not at the restaurant. There was Greyhound and bus station. It wasn't just Greyhound, but it was a city bus. The bus that ran around the base was also a city bus. Yeah, and we never had any issues about riding that bus on the base. It's just when they would leave the base, then I remember I was sitting in the front seat and the bus driver stopped right after we left the front gate.
Told me, you know,
that we had to, I had to move. And I looked at him and I thought that was strange.
back of the bus, bro.
Yeah, basically, exactly, and so I told him that, I was in the United States Air Force, like that made any difference to him, and I wasn't gonna move. And, my buddies, we were all sitting together, and they thought it was strange that he would say that because we hadn't been off the base. We didn't know anything about any rules or where you could sit. And especially, the Civil Rights Act had been passed 2 years prior to that. So, I'm here to fight for the United States. I didn't think that I was going to be accosted in such a way that...
Can I say something? The events you're speaking of took place in what year, please?
In 1967, the summer of 1967, after I had arrived and been there on the base because we were not allowed to leave the base in our early part of our training. But, like I said, 2 years prior to that, the Civil Rights Act had been passed. Didn't really.
65.
65.
56 years ago.
Yeah.
56 years ago.
Yeah. Being from California, specifically San Francisco, I didn't think about that we were going to have any issues just riding the bus, even though, I knew what had happened in the past. Going to Biloxi, Mississippi, I really had never heard of Biloxi because I never had any need to go there. I had no relatives until the Air Force says, "Oh, we're sending you to training at Keesler Air Force Base," and they told me what I was going to be trained in and that it was going to be a 3-month course, and I would be not only training at Biloxi for the career field, but I was also going to be going to Fort Benning, Georgia for jump school.
Now, did you get arrested or anything like that?
Yeah, when I went to the restaurant, there was 8 or 9 of us, and we had ordered our meal, and we're sitting there, and everyone at the table got their meal except for me. And I hadn't ordered anything that was a problem in preparing. So I sit there for a while. I didn't understand what was going on. And so we finally, amongst ourselves, we were talking about, why is it taking so long? So we finally called over the server, and she came over, and I asked her where was my dinner. And she says, well, you have to talk to the owner of the restaurant. And I said, why? And she said, well, I'll be right back. And she didn't come back. The owner came back, and he was very rude and nasty. He says, if you want to eat here, you have to go outside and go around to the back. And I said, why? And he says, well, I don't know where you're from, but obviously you don't know the rules. And, by that time, everybody's pairs of eyes was focused on me, and even some of my fellow airmen made a comment, well, that's not right. And I said, well, why can't I eat it here? And he says, you just don't know your place. and he said that I needed
That
to
was
leave
another
the
one, knowing
restaurant.
your place.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, knowing your
Yeah.
place is
And,
very great.
Yeah, I probably should have known better, but you know, when you think that a law,
Yeah, the Civil Rights Law had been
was
passed in
you know, you think,
1965.
hey, I'm
and
not, you know, that's old stuff that shouldn't be going on. So of course, he told me if I didn't leave, that he would call the police. And so my buddies, you know, they were pretty much finishing meals and said, let's go, you know. So we walked out of there. We were walking down the street. We wasn't any more than about 2 blocks from that restaurant when a policeman, 2 policemen, pull up in their car and yelled, you know, hey, you. And, you know, of course, we all turned around because we didn't know who he was talking to. And then he mentioned you, and he pointed directly at me. And as they were walking towards me, I noticed that the one policeman had his weapon drawn. And I thought, well, you know, what's this all about? And likewise, with the rest of us, we felt the same way. And so what then happened was they took me aside and talked to me for a few minutes.
were all of you in uniform?
Yeah, we were all in uniform, and that's probably how they identified us together. And they then said, well, you know, you were causing a disturbance at this restaurant. We don't allow that, and blah, blah, blah. And then the guy told me to turn around, and I said, why? And he says, well, we're taking you to jail. And I said, for what? And of course, they didn't want to be questioned. And they both just grabbed me and put the cuffs on me, put me in the car. And of course, my Air Force buddies were protesting about, you know, you can't do that. And they threatened them. And so they decided, I told them, I said, look, you know, the best thing for you guys to do is go back to the base or call the base and talk to the first sergeant and let him know what happened. So I was taken to jail where I spent approximately 10 hours locked in a room. It wasn't a jail cell. It was just a room that they held me in. And it just so happened that one civilian-looking guy came into the room and he says, well, what are you doing here? And I said, well, as you can see, I got these on, and I had showed him my, you know, the handcuffs that I was still in. And I said, I'd like to make a phone call, you know, trying to, he says, well, where do you want to call? I said, I need to call the base and talk to my first sergeant. And he left the room in he was gone about an hour, probably an hour and 15 minutes or so. And when he came back, he said,